Welcome to the Daily Word, verse by verse. Grab your Bibles and follow along as we study the book of Romans. Keep in mind, I am using the Holman Christian Standard Bible. So if you're using a different translation, the read is different, but the message is the same. And also, keep in mind that these Daily Word, verse by verse studies are uploaded to my YouTube channel, BP The Bible Perspective. That's BP The Bible Perspective. So go there, like, subscribe, share these videos. And again, you'll find all of our studies, the Daily Word studies, plus the Bible Perspective studies as well. Well, you're in chapter 10, and in chapter 9, Paul shifted from talking about salvation. And again, chapters 1 through 8 gives a full treatment on the subject of salvation, a full treatment. And if you study those chapters, you will know that you're saved. You'll know why you're saved, who's saving you, how to keep saved, and all that kind of stuff. And as he shifted into chapter 9, we said, excuse me, he expressed his anguish over his nation, the nation of Israel, which he is a Jew, and their salvation. Why Israel is not saved. And that's what chapter 9 was about. It wasn't about theology. It wasn't about Calvinism. Even though Calvinism, Reformed theology, or the doctrine of predestination, chapter 9 is one of their foundational chapters that they use to establish that God chooses some to go to hell, while chooses others to go to heaven. That's it in a nutshell, by the way. They wouldn't put it that way, but that's really what it's all about. And they use chapter 9 as to say the sovereignty of God. Well, we said that the chapter really was talking about Israel, why Israel isn't saved. And the one reason why is because, and as Paul is addressing, he says that they fail at recognizing God's sovereignty to choose grace over law. That's what chapter 9 is about. Now in chapter 10, he's going to continue. In verse 1, he says, "Brothers, my heart desire and prayer to God concerning them is for their salvation." Now, if Paul believed in Calvinism, if Reformed theology, why is he praying for their salvation if he doesn't know if God has chosen them to be saved or not? Now, remember, we're going to get into chapter 11, and he's going to even go into further detail with that. But Paul, again, is saying his anguish, and as well as his question is, why aren't God's own people? Now remember, at this point, he's talking to the nation of Israel as a nation, as a group, not individual. Now Paul's going to address the individual in a moment. In chapter 11. But he's talking to them as a group. Now keep in mind, Paul himself is a Jew who came to faith. The apostles were Jews who came to faith. The Christian movement started off in the book of Acts. They were all Jews. In fact, for the first 10 chapters of Acts, the Christian church was predominantly Jewish, only reaching out to Jewish people to the 10th chapter. So, again, we're not talking individual Jews, but the nation as a whole. So he says, my prayer for them is that they would be saved. Now, verse 2. I can testify about them that they have a zeal for God, but not according to knowledge. Or we can say the knowledge. He says, now they do have a zeal for God. Now again, if you look at the nation of Israel, especially during Paul's time and during Jesus' time, you see this great push, zeal for the law. And he's going to talk about that, because he says their zeal is not according to knowledge. Now, this word zeal means to burn hot for. They're excited for. Their purpose. They're burning hot. Actually, the word zealous oftentimes is confused with the word jealous. When it says God is a jealous God, and that word is also, is confused, or I should say confused with envy. So in other words, we can be envious of someone. In other words, because you get a new car, I'm envious of you. I wish I had it. Why do you have it and I don't? That's envy. Jealous, and then the word zealous, come really the same word, It means to be passionate, to burn hot for, to be excited for. And that's basically what it means. So you could be jealous or zealous for many things. You could be zealous for your new job. And some of the slang, we would say you're geeked up about it. You're hyped up about it. You burn to have it. And by the way, the zealous in the sense is this hot passion that can only be quenched by doing or fulfilling what it is that you're fulfilling for. So so in terms of a relationship, when it says that God is a jealous God, meaning that God burns hot for us, we're not reciprocating, and so it kind of leaves God hanging, or it leaves the person hanging if the relationship is hot on one side. All right. So he says, I can testify about them that they have a zeal for God, but not according to knowledge. Verse 3, because they disregarded the righteousness from God and attempted to establish their own righteousness, they have not submitted themselves to God's righteousness. Embedded in this statement here is a heart matter. They disregarded God's righteousness. And notice this, attempted to establish their own. This is the heart of all religion. All religions that they are attempting to establish. In other words, God, this is what I'm presenting to you. I often am curious with people who want to, for example, start gay churches. There are gay congregations. You can say they're progressive congregations. And I'm thinking to myself, what's the point? In other words, why would you have a religion that you have to make up? Because if you're not submitting yourself to the righteousness of God, then you're doing this what the Jews did. God, this is what I want you to have. Okay? And that's a difference when Jesus says, come as you are, versus God, accept me as I am. A lot different. See, I come to God empty, pliable to change. I don't come to God with my demands. And this is what a lot of the progressive religions do. Well, I'm gay, so you have to accept me. Well, that's like saying if I'm an adulterer, God, you have to accept me. If I'm a womanizer, God, you have to accept me. Now, I may come to God broken with my weakness in those areas. But do I seek to establish my own righteousness with God? So he says that they disregarded the righteousness that comes from God to establish their own. That is the problem with all religion. It's also the pride of the heart. Now we go back to Cain. Go back to the Genesis account. Remember Adam's sin, thus from that point everybody was born in sin. So you have the two sons of Adam, Cain and Abel. Cain was a wicked person. But here is the interesting thing about Cain. Though he was wicked, and yes, he was wicked, he was also religious in the sense of what would be religious of that day. How do we know that? Well, Abel, his brother, was righteous, but they both presented sacrifices or offerings to God. Now, what was interesting is that God rejected Cain's offering. And later we reveal his heart wasn't right with God. Cain represents those religious people who say, God, this is what I'm offering you. Take it. And God says, no, I don't play your game, you play mine. And as a result, God rejected Cain. But in rejecting Cain, Cain's heart was revealed. And that's what he's referring to. The Jews sought to establish their own righteousness. You can't establish right standing with God on your own. Now we get more into this when we pick it up in verse for next time.